गलत.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Ashfaq Khan, and today I am coming with another questions: how to get good ink adhesion during the printings. So this is a question that I received a couple of days before from one printers because they were facing a lot of issues related to ink adhesions. So they asked about this one. Yeah. So there are a number of factors that are responsible for ink adhesions, adhesions on substrates like ink chemistry, like substrate quality, what type of substrate you are using. Like you are using paperboard, you are using untreated substrate, you are using treated substrate, then surface treatment of substrates, like what is the condition for surface treatments, and the ink transfer methods. Either you are flexographic printing, gravure printing, screen printings, letterpress printings, or offset printing, or you are doing the pad printing. So this is a very important for you to so understand. In part one, we are going to discuss about the ink chemistry. In part two, what are the other causes of the ink adhesions, and then how can we improve the ink adhesions during printing, after printings, and then what are the factors that affect the ink adhesions. So let's start ink adhesions. First of all, understand, if you know the understand if you understand the ink chemistry, then you are able to tackle this ink adhesion issue in your press rooms. So first of all, you need also need to know the types of inks. What are the types of inks? There are multiple type of inks we are using in flexographic printing, we are using in rotogravure printing, we are using in screen printing, we are using in letterpress printing, offset printing, or any other types of printings. So mostly we are dividing all printing inks into four categories: oil basings made from the oils and varnishes and used in offset printing, in lithographic printing. Then other types of inks, UV inks, also used in inkjet printers. We are also using UV ink in offset printing. So special inks based on the monomers and light sensitive substances that polymerize after UV treatments. So in UV inks, basically we are not using any oils, we are not using any solvents, we are not using any chemicals. So these inks are curing by the UV, sensitive, intense UV light. Then another types, electron beam inks, similar to UV inks. They are similar to UV inks based on electron beam and generated by electric current. So, but there are some disadvantages of this type of electron beamings. Like in most of cases, we observe the electron beamings damage the papers, where and so we also need to wear protection against X-rays. Then another important types of ink, liquid inks. So more liquid inks made from solvents like ethanol, ethyl acetate, or ether, or glycols, or so what happens, and then varnishes and use flex on gravure printing. Now, liquid inks are divided into two types: water base and solvent base. So in water base, we use water as a solvents that help us to dissolve the resins to work as a carrier in the printing inks. So, but now component of printing inks. After types of printing inks, you also now printing all printing inks based on four components: resins, add dispersion, add, and also work as a binder to fix the pigments on the papers. If you are printing on papers, then you also need to fix this resins help us to fix the pigment particles on the papers, on the films. Either you are using the LDP, you are using the HD, you are using the polyester, you are using the OPP. So the resins help us to fix the particles, pigment particles on the substrate. Then another component, pigment. Pigment also provide the colorist properties of the inks. We are using multiple type of pigments. We are using green pigment in green inks, then red pigments in warm red. So there are multiple type of pigments. Then solvents. In inks, we are also using the solvents like isopropyl alcohol, ethanols, then ethyl estates, and then the fourth component is the additives that enhance the properties of printing inks. So printing ink composition, when we are talk about the printing ink composition, so printing ink composition based on the, as we discussed in our previous slides, based on four components: pigments, binders, means resins that we use in the, that help us to bind the, fix the pigment particles on the substrates, solvents and additives. Then similarly, in solvent basings, we are in water basing, we are using water, and in solvent base, we are using other non-polar chemicals like ethanol, ethyl estates, and propyl estate and propyl alcohol. So, what should be the ratio? What is the average ratio of these components inside the inks? So about pigment is from 5 to 15%, then binder is of 10 to 30%, and then solvents existing in the inks from 30 to 50%, and then additive 2 to 8%. So this is the general composition of the printing inks. So if you need a higher viscosity inks, so you can reduce the solvents concentrations, solvent ratio inside the formulations. And if you need more adhesion, more binder, then you can increase the binder percentage. So this is the composition of liquid inks. Then another step, pigments. What type of pigments we are using inside the inks? Remember, when the all pigments are existing in powder form and containing the particle size, specific particle size, and during ink manufacturing, if we are reducing the particle size, the color strength of pigment is going to be increased. And if pigment concentration is going to be increased, it shows good opacities and good strength for the inks. But on other side, if the particle size is decrease, so this also increase, so this also decrease the color strength. So here are some pigments that mostly we commonly use in the inks, like yellow inks, yellow PY13s, then green inks, phthalocyanines, then blue inks, copper phthalocyanines, then violet inks, carabazole violet, black ink, carbon black, and then orange, and then lithobromine we are using in red inks, and then in white inks we are using the titanium dioxide. So these are the some common pigments that we are using mostly in inks. Either it's a solvent based inks, either it's a water based inks. So, what type of another next, resins? Remember, we discussed in our previous slide, we discussed there are four components of the printing inks: pigments, resins, additives, and solvents. So in pigments, we are using multiple types of pigments. Like in white ink, we are using titanium dioxide. In red, we are using lithol red, and then green, cyan, and then we are using multiple pigments. So similarly, we are also using the binder, resins. So we are also based on the requirements of the customer, based on the substrate. We are using the multiple type of binders. We are using the polyurethane. We are using the polyamides. We are using formaldehydes, emulsion polymers, then alkyd resins, unsaturated polyester resins, and then acrylic resin. So these are the some common types of resins that we use in the printing inks, and these resins help us to enhance the ink adhesions on the substrates. So if your resin percentage is not correct, so this will impact on your ink adhesions also. And what type of additive we are using? We are using multiple additives. We are using like promote the, we are using the additive to promote the rub resistance. We are using to promote the pigment dispersions. Sometimes we need additive to reduce the surface tension and ink forming. Sometimes we need a additive to inhibit the setting of pigments, improving wetting of pigments. Sometimes we are using the additives to control the viscosity and pH of inks, increase the viscosity and adhesion of inks, and enhance the flexibility of the printing. So these type of additives help us to control the properties of the inks. The fourth component of ink is solvents. We are dividing the all solvents into two types: non-polar solvents and polar solvents. What are the non-polar solvents like benzene, ethanol, ethyl esters, and what is the polar solvents? The polar solvent is water. So why we use the solvents in the inks? Because solvent dissolve the materials and evaporate quickly and cleanly. If we are using solvent based inks, so when we are applying the inks on the substrates, the solvents are evaporating, containing like 30 to 50% solvents. So the solvents are evaporate from the surface of the papers or surface of the substrate, keeping behind the resins, binder, and pigment particles. And another function of solvents, maintain ink flow suitable for printing. Like if we need a thin inks or we need a thick inks, so we control it with the help of solvents. Solvents also keep ink in liquid during the transferring to plate or cylinder to the substrates. So what will happen if you are not going to add solvents? This is very important questions. If you are not going to add solvents inside the inks, so what will happen? You cannot dissolve the materials. Then you cannot maintain the ink flow according to your printing process. And then you cannot transfer the inks from ink pen to any logs or any logs to plate or plate to your substrate. So solvents are very important. If you are using water basings, if you are using solvent basings, so this is the fourth component of the printing inks. Then solvents. Some solvents are organics like benzene, ethanol, ethyl acetate, and some are water is inorganic solvents that help us to dissolve the materials. So mostly the petroleum fraction we are using is solvent organic solvent petroleum fractions, aliphatic hydrocarbon, and with boiling point 220 to 275. And then flexographic and gravure printing use up to 65% solvents, alcohol, aliphatic naphtha, esters, ketones, glycol, ethers. And in water-based, flexographic water-based, we use water as a solvents. And then we also use some glycols and alcohols content from 5 to 10% to control the properties of the water basins. So solvents are very important in the printing. Now, how can we choose the right solvents for our printing process? This is very important questions. Do we know how solvents impacts on the performance of the printing inks? Here are some rules for choosing the safer solvents. When you are choosing the solvents, always compare threshold limit values. If you don't know the threshold limit values for the solvent, please don't use it in the inks. Choose your solvent based on compare threshold limit values. Choose solvent with the higher threshold value limits whenever possible. Don't go for lows. Compare evaporation rates. Choose solvent with low evaporation rate whenever possible. Don't go for a high evaporation rate solvents. Because if you are using the high evaporation rate solvents in your printing inks, you can face many problems like ink fast drying, pinholing, then foaming, thixotrophics, incompatibility with the substrates. Compare flash point. When you are choosing the right solvents, always choose the high flash point solvents. Then compare toxic effects. Choose the solvent with less toxic effect whenever possible. If we have a couple of solvents, some solvents are toxic, or some solvents are non-toxic, so use the non-toxic solvents. Very important. Compare with the classes. So choose solvent with environmentally friendly. Very important. Thank you. So